Human trafficking is organized crime and the exploitation. That is the theme for this year's commemoration, or if you like, observance of the UN Day Against Exploitation or Trafficking in Persons, which of course has become the basis for reflection as regards the implications of trafficking in persons, whether in Nigeria, Africa, or anywhere else across the world. Today, we understand the numbers do not look good when it comes to trafficking and the implications, whether social, economic, and otherwise, that they have across the country on governments, society, communities, and indeed families and households. Today, we understand it has become a hydra-headed monster that the entire world across sectors with interagency collaboration and multifaceted efforts and approach must address as quickly as possible. However, the challenge is further complicated given the fact that there is this evolution around this phenomenon today known as trafficking in persons. Our focus on the program this week will be to look at what the legal issues are. How can the law, whether local or international, can become instrumental in curbing these if you like, existential menace that we are now grappling with. We'll take a break on the program. When we return, we meet my guests, and then we'll pull the rest of it. As always, it's a delight to have you join us here. On Scale of Justice, I'm Wiyag Mofogbe saying welcome to the program. My guest today is a lawyer, someone with a handle on the conversation we're having on the program today, Amy Onyinyechi Onwemere. She's a lawyer, human rights advocate, and program specialist in the non-governmental organizations sector. Thank you so very much for joining us today on the program. First of all, just so we don't take much of your time, I'd like us to begin from what exactly constitutes trafficking in persons, because it will appear there's a bit of haziness in terms of definition and the components around this very disturbing phenomenon.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the show. So, what constitutes trafficking in persons? So what you should have in mind is to look for three core elements that are aligned with the international standards for defining trafficking in persons. So the international standards such as the UN Palermo Protocol, it says that you should look for the following core elements. Number one is the act. What is done? So it refers to the actual recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. These actions can occur within or across national borders. So what you should note here is that it can take place within a country like Nigeria, that is across the various states, or it can happen across different countries, across border countries. For instance, like from Nigeria to Republic of Benin and so on and so forth. That is for the act. Then the second element is the means. How is it done? So this involves the methods used to carry out the act, which may include threat or use of force, abduction, fraud or deception, abuse of power or a position of vulnerability, giving or receiving payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person, having control over another person. So that was the second core element. So the third and last core element is the purpose. Why is it done? So the ultimate goal of trafficking is to exploit. which can take many forms, including sexual exploitation, which is very common, forced labor or services, slavery or practices similar to slavery, removal of organs, which is now a disturbing trend in recent times, use of persons in armed conflicts, then child labor or domestic servitude. However, there's a special consideration for children. Any act done for the purpose of exploitation is considered trafficking, regardless of whether coercion or deception was involved. This was provided by the NAPTIP Act of 2015. So for children, they don't have to be coerced or deceived. As long as these three core elements are present, then you have trafficking playing out. Thank you.
Something else, as they say, there's no smoke without fire. Let's talk about the core factors that drive these trends, these phenomenon we are now referring to as trafficking in persons.
So, trafficking is driven by a mix of socioeconomic, cultural, and institutional factors. So, based on some insights from this year, some of the major drivers include poverty and economic hardship. So, many Nigerians, especially youth, are seeking better opportunities abroad due to high unemployment and limited economic prospects. Traffickers they usually exploit these desperations by offering false promises of jobs or education. They offer promises of a better life to these young persons that they target. Then another point is the lack of education and skills. Limited access to quality education and vocational training leaves many individuals vulnerable to exploitation. Without the knowledge or skills to pursue legitimate opportunities, they become easy targets for traffickers, because a lot of people that are ignorant or they're not very enlightened, they are usually easy pickings for the traffickers. Then the third point is cultural and gender norms. In some communities, cultural expectations and gender roles contribute to the trafficking of women and girls, especially for forced labor and sexual exploitation. These norms often discourage reporting or resisting trafficking. So because these norms are in place in a cultural setting, there is this culture of silence and people don't speak up in that area. So another point to note is weak law enforcement and border control. So despite existing laws, enforcement is often inadequate. Corruption, lack of resources, and poor coordination among agencies allow trafficking networks to operate with impunity. So the next point is internal conflicts and displacement. So violence and insecurity in parts of Nigeria, for instance, such as the Northeast, have displaced many people, making them more susceptible to traffickers who promise safety or resettlement. So because displaced persons, they are looking for that sense of stability, that sense of security. Traffickers will now exploit this desperation for a safe haven, for that sense of security, and they will use that to take advantage of such displaced persons. Thank you.
Talk about something also very pivotal now. I mean, one would expect ordinarily that because of the gamut of provisions that you have within the framework of international laws, that by now we either are not talking about trafficking at all, or we are talking about it on a scale that is far lower, far more, less intense than we have today. But that has not been the case. It will look like this phenomenon, this practice is on the loose, despite international law. So how do we make sense of this sort of reality?
So, international law, they plays a central role in curtailing trafficking in persons. So, it has helped establish legal frameworks promoting international cooperation and protecting victims' rights. So, I'll give a breakdown of its position and impact. So, number one, key international legal instruments. The cornerstone of international efforts is the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocol. The protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, also known as the Palermo Protocol, which was adopted in year 2000. So this protocol defines trafficking in persons, mandates trafficking in persons, and mandates the prosecution of trafficking in persons and related offenses, promotes victim protection, including physical, psychosocial recovery, and encourages international cooperation among states in investigation, prosecution, and extradition. The second point is the human rights framework. The international human rights law also prohibits practices linked to trafficking, such as slavery and servitude, forced labor, child sexual exploitation, and forced labor. So addressed in instruments, these are addressed in instruments like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on the Rights of a Child, 1989, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 1979. So what are the historical foundations? Earlier treaties also laid groundwork. Earlier treaties such as the Convention for the Suppression of the Trafficking in Persons, which came to be in 1949. So in terms of implementation and monitoring, organizations such as the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, that's the UNODC, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights support states in implementing these laws through technical assistance, capacity building, monitoring, and reporting mechanisms. But in spite of all these support, it's not without its challenges. So the challenges here include inconsistent implementation across countries, 2, corruption and weak law enforcement, 3, limited victim support services, and 4, cross-border complexities. Thank you.
Amy, we're going to take a quick break at this point, and we'll return shortly to continue to have this conversation at least for the next few minutes. When we return, we'll look at 2 more issues. First, what are the implications of trafficking in persons on the individuals so trafficked? And second, what more can we do to strengthen efforts, whether from the legal perspective or law enforcement standpoint, back at home, that is domestically? All of that coming shortly after this break. Please do stay with us.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think everyone will stay with us. So, Amy, let me put these 2 last questions in front of you. First of all, let's talk about how this kind of practice, if you like, tramples on the rights of these persons who are being trafficked, because it will appear, I mean, no thanks to ignorance, for the most part, we see it as though it's just an economic venture. Talk to our viewers about the human rights implications of this phenomenon.
Far-reaching implications for those individuals that are affected. So, some of the key human rights impacts include: one, violation of fundamental rights. Um, so, under that, right to liberty and security is compromised. Victims and survivors are often held against their will, deprived of freedom of movement. So that is a fundamental right that is heavily violated. So the next point is the next right that is violated is the right to be free from torture and cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. So individuals that are directly affected or victims suffer physical and psychological abuse. So the third right that is violated is the right to life. So in some extreme cases, individuals that are trafficked can also be killed in the process because they're exposed to hazardous work conditions, they're exposed to violence, and they're exposed to neglect. So the right to life is jeopardized. Then the second point is exploitation and abuse. So under this, we see forced labor, sexual exploitation, and also organ trafficking or organ harvesting. So these are the 3 points that come under exploitation and abuse. Then the third area is denial of legal protection. So when individuals are trafficked to another country, these individuals they face lack of access to justice because they fear the authorities and they don't want to be treated like criminals. So that access to justice is denied for them. So, and there's also violation of labor rights. So because they came into a country through an illegal means, there will be no contracts, there will be unfair wages and unsafe working conditions. Their means of safety is violated and exploited. And also, there is also immigration-related abuse. Trafficked persons are usually undocumented and face deportation rather than protection. Because they are treated as criminals, because they didn't come in through the appropriate channels, so they will be viewed as criminals and they would face deportation rather than protection. So the fourth is psychological and social harm. The trauma of trafficking can lead to mental health issues, social stigma, and loss of identity. So these individuals, they face some psychological trauma. So that mental health issue is very strong there. And there's also the social stigma. They are usually depressed. They will not really integrate with the society that they are in. And there's the loss of identity. In many cases, trafficked persons have their passports seized, they have identification seized, so they lose their sense of identity in the process. So the fifth one is central.
I'm sorry to bump in on you, Amy, but just so I can do this in 1 minute. Let's talk about what more efforts can be put in, or if you like, invested, to strengthen our legal framework by our home. Also look at enforcement, because, I mean, I've spoken with professionals like yourself over time, and they tend to think very unanimously that law enforcement back at home is weak enough to allow these criminals get away with their crimes.
Okay, so what your question? Could you repeat your question, please?
About
I can't hear you.
to strengthen.
You broke.
Yes, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Good. So let's spend the next 1 minute, time factor, to look at how much more work we need to put into strengthening our law enforcement back at home in Nigeria.
Okay, so can you hear me? Can you hear me? Well, can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Oh, incidentally, I can hear you all right.
All right, I can hear you now.
All right, so did you get a question?
Yes, could you repeat it, please? Sorry.
Yes, I was saying that every time I talk to experts like yourself about this sort of issue, they tend to be unanimous in the thinking that law enforcement back at home is weak enough to allow these criminals who perpetrate, carry out trafficking in persons to get away with their crimes. What more can we do to strengthen that front?
Okay, so to help strengthen legal frameworks, we can address the root causes. For instance, tackling poverty, insecurity, and lack of education, which make people vulnerable. Because, as I earlier mentioned, there are legal frameworks in place, but the implementation is an issue, and that is so in many of our laws in Nigeria. So this one does not seem to be an exception. So to help to strengthen these laws, we can look at we can also enforce anti-trafficking laws rigorously to deter criminal networks. We can also create public awareness and education campaigns in local languages to educate communities. Keeping citizens informed as well will also help. We can use the schools and religious institutions and media to help spread awareness. We can also foster collaboration with NAPTIP, civil society, international partners, and local leaders. And there is also a national action plan regarding trafficking in persons. It's supposed to be implemented between 2022 and 2026. So we should also work on implementing the national action plan, as well as engage in regional and international cooperation to combat cross-border trafficking. Thank you.
Okay, so I think this is that point where we are also going to say a big thank you to you, Onyechi, Amy, Onwemere, for taking our time to speak to us about this. We do not take for granted the expertise that you have put into this conversation the last 25 minutes. We say, again, we're grateful.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
And that's what we're leaving it, everyone, this week. But just to, again, mention that even though 30th of July every other year has been set aside by the United Nations to help address issues around trafficking in persons, it must be an issue that we take into every other day, 365 days a year, to ensure that all hands are on deck to run circles around this monster. I'm Uyag Mofwegbe, thanking you on behalf of my team for being a part of Scale of Justice today. Bye-bye.